is about implementation considerations for clients, which I'm glad somebody suggested it because it is really important that when you type a name and I type a name into two different clients, they actually resolve to the same underlying name hash, because otherwise there are numerous opportunities for things to go horribly, horribly wrong. So I thought I'd start with a quick overview, and I should say actually that I think this talk can and should extend beyond merely just normalizing names and so on. There are other things that we talk about like UI affordances, like reverse resolution, like how to show verified stuff, like we were talking about earlier with name verification and green ticks and so forth. But I thought I'd start by giving a quick overview of how clients are supposed to deal with Unicode names, deal with normalizing names, like names that are illegal, and how to deal with things like homoglyph issues in browsers. And then we can sort of expand from there. So the ENS Docs Implementers Guide has a couple of sections on normalizing and validating names, and on handling of ambiguous names. The first thing is you can't just take a standard Unicode string, split it on dots, and then feed every part into the name hash algorithm, because names need normalizing. So foo with capital O's and foo with lowercase o's is the same thing. You also can't just call to lowercase in the language of your choice, because most of those aren't Unicode aware. And those that are may follow different rules. And again, then we have a situation where somebody has my ether wallet belief and somebody else has some other variant of my ether wallet belief that say different clients get. And this becomes particularly relevant when your name contains legitimate Unicode characters because it's written in kanji or because it's written in...
How do you suggest lowercase things? What's the best with lowercase?
Just about to get to that. So the official process for this is you must pass it through UTS-46, which is a Unicode standard for normalizing names for use in domain names. It handles case folding, which is a more generalized version of lowercasing or uppercasing, because not every language has a concept of lowercase or uppercase. And it also handles finding prohibited characters and which ASCII characters are allowed. So if you find the easiest way is your language probably has a UTS-46 library, split the name on dots, and then for each component, run it through UTS-46 with non-transitional rules, and use standard 3 ASCII rules equals true, which means basically prohibit characters like underscores and dollar signs and all the other ASCII characters that are outside the allowed range, and also there are a few Unicode ranges of unassigned characters and so on that shouldn't be allowed in names. So if you're doing this in JavaScript, the Ethereum ENS library already incorporates all of this for you.
So to be clear, like this is specifically talking about using ENS in clients for human readable names.
Yes.
Because like you may have use cases for ENS where you don't care if it's human readable or not, and then you don't need to restrict that, right?
If it's represented as a text dot separated text string, then it should still go through this, because otherwise you end up with the ambiguity issue.
Okay.
If you want to have a name that is picture of my cat .env, where a picture of my cat is a particular PNG, then you're welcome to do that. And obviously you can't pass that through Unicode processing, but then it shouldn't be represented as a dot separated name.
But I mean, can you have like hash, where you just have like different hashes for the results?
Yes, but you shouldn't represent that as hash, because then that would also be the result you get from hashing those hashes.
Oh, okay. So do you have a raw representation for that?
The name hash is the raw representation of the complete final thing, and the label hash is the representation of one component. We don't have a raw representation of dot separated hashes for components.
Okay, interesting.
If you want to invent a notation for that, then very welcome to.
Double dots, double dot.
Colons,
I don't know, there might be empty strings.
No, this is what URIs are for. You just
Yeah.
come up with a URI scheme in front.
Yeah. Okay.
Additionally, if you want to use this in JavaScript, I took just this function and isolated it
Name
as an
hash,
npm
yes.
module.
It's
ENS name hash.
It's ENS name hash. ago. And in fact, I can't remember I already did it, but the intention is to make a theory of ENS depend on that library to avoid replication.
Yeah, I just copied this thing. It imports that and all that.
One slight hiccup here is that in JavaScript, the JavaScript UTS-46 library depends on one ES6 feature in order to iterate over long UCS characters. I've got no pull request against that library to remove that feature so that it will be ES5 happy, but it hasn't been responded to or merged yet. So if you really need to run into the ES5 stuff, then you may run into issues or need to patch on my patch. So far, so straightforward as long as you follow the rules. One thing that we should probably add to action items is developing a test suite and a set of test vectors for determining if a client is compliant. So input strings of difficult combinations of letters and output name hashes. The second issue is one that's come up a couple of times this weekend, which is handling of ambiguous names. Names in Cyrillic, names mixing different alphabets together. And fixing this, so this is homoglyph attacks, and fixing this is non-trivial. In traditional browsers, they apply a strategy of some kind to try and detect these names, and when they detect a suspicious name, they, instead of showing the Unicode version of the name, show the Unicode version of the name. Unicode, as you probably know, but is a way to encode Unicode names using legacy ASCII character sets. It looks like XM dash dash and then a whole bunch of text and a dash and so on. The issue here is that because the DNS was invented in 1980 something, maybe 1979, and ENS was invented last year, there was really no reason to limit ENS to Unicode, to ASCII only. So ENS natively supports Unicode and thus doesn't use Unicode for encoding names. So it arguably at least does not make sense for browsers and clients to show the Unicode version of a name if it's suspicious looking, because that's actually not a representation that's used anywhere. So we as client implementers need to come up with other ways to warn users that a name is suspicious or weirdly constructed.
Yeah, just like we are not in the late 80s anymore. We can use colors and things like that.
Yes.
So my intention with Myth is simply to whenever I find a disparate set of characters, to highlight them in some color with red, and then alert users saying those letters might not appear what they are or something like that, and maybe even ask, do you want to enable Russian Cyrillic characters in your browser?
And it may not even be necessary to show them the specific characters that are decepted, just to warn them that it contains a mix of strings in a suspicious fashion.
I was thinking about the colors thing, and then like color blindness.
Yes.
And then I was thinking, okay, what you do is you go to different colors and you resize and retypeface those letters, right? So you use like sans serif for some of them and serif for the other ones.
And then everyone like throws up because it's so ugly.
And then they know that something weird is going
And
on,
they
right?
definitely so nauseous.
And I
They
look
know
like
it's
a
wrong.
character. It looks like a sans
pretty. When they look at them all, they're like, oh, this looks so nice. I'm definitely going to use this. You make the bad ones look really bad. So you're like, man, this is fucked up.
Ultimately, as a user, if I go to a phishing URL that's using Cyrillic characters, I don't actually care which characters are Cyrillic. I just care that it's obviously not a normal URL. So I personally would be happy with a red warning that says this URL is deceptively constructed or something along those lines.
Just like on that, the Unicode consortium has the UTR-36 and UTS-39, which is largely formed by Google, which has all of these sort of attacks. Well, not all of them, but like they're all like clearly defined. And they also talk about TR9, which is bidirectional Unicode characters. There's also invisible characters.
Sorry, it's UTR-36.
And 39, TS-39.
UTS-39.
Yeah, I think you can kind of just remove the U, but
Yeah. Okay, so both good points, thank you. Both of these should be reviewed by client implementers as well.
Yeah.
So you've got lots of reading to do.
yeah.
So
So basically, as I understand it, is like there's IDNA 2003 and 2008, which informs this transition into Unicode more or less into collection RFCs. We could probably ignore all of that.
Yes. So my understanding from reading the IGNA stuff is it is largely concerned with Unicode encoding and such, and that UTS-46 is the underlying transform that we actually care about now.
Yes, exactly. So these two I would like to see implemented, and in how I view it is like 3 layers of opinions. Okay, we've been debating a lot about dispute resolution, but then we have this sort of layer 2, which is whatever we want to call these lists. And then this third layer, which is very is on the client implementation, which is informed by layer 2 also, because you can basically do these comparisons between these lists and these specifications as well.
So can you briefly summarize what UTR 36 and UTS 39 are about?
I cannot, but we could scroll through them. There's recommendations down the bottom of one of them, and I think it's under 2. Basically, there's a bunch of security issues that are outlined in all of these.
Yep, so this report is a summary of security issues, and some recommendations.
Yes.
Not an algorithm for transforming that.
No, there isn't, but there is a spoof checker library that's implemented by PHP and another one which implements these. And they more or less cover the same things that Chromium and Firefox do.
Right, okay. So to clarify, if you do not implement UTS-46 normalization, you are broken. You are not calculating correct name hashes from URLs. If you want to protect your users from URLs that have valid name hashes but are deceptive, you should read UTR-36 and UTS-39 so that you know how to detect and highlight these URLs.
And that's some of the stuff that's in the resolver stuff I was talking about earlier.
Yes.
Yes, it's very related.
And also good reading is Chromium's documentation linked from the ENS docs on how it handles ID and what their systems are for detecting deceptive URLs and so forth. Although I suspect 36 and 39 more or less obsolete that now.
More or less, yeah. And some of the stuff is actually broken in that, but it's still pretty good in terms of getting a understanding of what they're doing.
Yeah, from language wise, yesterday there are 3 agents in community, and we talked about how to handle our languages with based on Chinese characters, and the current Unicode system unfortunately does not fit well on our real needs within the Unicode system or Google, or because mainland China, Google is not there, and in Japan, Japan headquarters is maybe it's gone, and just only marketing function kind of thing right now. So and the ENS is the first implementation of the text on the blockchain, and there are those kind of needs that using different characters, different languages, nations to really beneficially utilize the internet or blockchain or whatever online things, or connected to the cultural or language-based cultural requirements of the nation. So at this moment, I didn't summarize to present to show you well, but in long-term range, I myself would like to try to put those kind of functionality, diversity functionality into the blockchain-based ENS or whatever we are gonna make, we are gonna try making in near future.
So what would that be in concrete terms? What would that involve?
Excuse me?
What would putting language diversity into ENS involve?
Well, for example, yeah, I registered several kanji domain name in ENS, but for example, the exchange is exchange in Japanese is just 3 or 4 characters. Yeah, 3 characters. Yeah, 2 or 3 characters.
So you're saying the 7 letter limit means that you practically have to write a novel.
Yeah.
Well,
That makes sense, but like like kanji is full words or like phrases. It's
So-
like
So those limitations have to have some, variation. And it depends on the
So
real needs.
this did come up before launch, and I wasn't aware of a good solution. Like people suggested counting by bytes, but counting usually of 8 bytes isn't really a good representation of information content either, because some alphabets that contain relatively little information per character are way out in Unicode space, and other alphabets that contain a lot of information per character are closer in, and therefore it wouldn't be represented. But then, as you point out, numerous characters. Do you have any suggestions, like short of going through every alphabet in Unicode and determining how much information per character is? Do you have any recommendations?
I'm not good at the code system and governance of that at this moment, but I'm willing to do that if that really matters.
That's interesting because it seems that would eventually be solved when we reduce the limit.
Yeah. When is that, by the way?
Before we go there,
I want to know.
is there any other implementation detail in which other non-English languages didn't work well in ENS?
The font size, character size is one of them. And for example, in the alphabetic English characters, the search engine and domain name directly connected to us. But for the Chinese or Japanese character case, there are some redundant layer inside on ENS. So I'm not a SEO guy, but in the alphabetic character case, it's direct connection of the name and search ranking kind of thing. But for Japanese case, there are several alternative auto name on particular word. Like Japanese itself has several type of character called hiragana, katakana, kanji, three kind, and then alphabet. So honkanjo itself can be written in many.
So it's like, I mean, one thing is like, how much does that matter at this current moment? Because I mean, in like kanji, like the .e doesn't currently translate to that.
Yeah, but
right?
it's just a representation. You don't actually need to have that representation.
Well, but how much do we need the representation right now of like solving this problem? Like how many actual, I think, is this actually a problem?
He's bringing it up as a problem, he's presenting it as a problem. I would say that based on the number of Japanese sport teams we get every month, there's a large user base in Japan that speaks Japanese and uses Japanese characters. I would say that it's worth discussing, absolutely.
I don't think it's not worth
The thing is, like, now when you type in URL, you can actually register domain in Japanese. I think that, but in reality, not many people use it because these are like ENS is for what you represent in ENS is rather like key than the content. Content you have to be able to represent in whatever the language you do. But your native result, if you try to make it like to try to read Japanese, that means non-Japanese people it's almost impossible to resolve, even though you want to do it. So I don't know, as a idealistic, it's nice to be able to support, but in a practical sense, I don't know. So we don't use it.
So to be clear, you're basically saying like Japanese users typically know how to enter English alphabet characters, but English speakers do not know how to enter katakana, hiragana.
We do use alphabet.
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question. So I'm not sure if I understood the issue, but is the second issue you brought up about normalization or about normalization, just being able to normalize and make sure that, like, if you type a name, before we hash it, we reduce it to like a common thing, just like the uppercase, lowercase. Is that what he's bringing up?
I think
part of it was that there's like one word will have several different iterations. So like the word for door will have like also like X, Y, Z, Bob, cat, and like they're all mean the same thing. So like you're actually trying to like normalize or translate, like that's not a functional way to do it.
And that's not unique to Japanese.
Yeah.
I mean, we have color,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
So then we can register both. I don't see that as a problem.
So that was one.
And then, so like I think back to using plus, like for example, character identification. For example, my name, Makoto is 6 characters, but in Chinese character is 1. If I want to have Makoto.e, current is the indication of the 7 characters, but I will do that because you can't type Makoto unless you copy and paste. Then it gets back to the,
Yeah,
well, like you need to copy and paste.
But I'm okay with that in the sense that I don't mind if we suddenly discover that we have a sub-community that where only Japanese people are sending to Japanese people in culture. I think that's great because it allows Ethereum to flourish in smaller communities. I don't think that's a problem, right? It's just like an optional.
I guess, yeah, it's optional, but it's not the.
Yeah, and it's like also that also kills the option of like at some point translating into other languages. So if you wanted to like globally register a domain, and you want anyone in any language to be able to use their language to get to your domain, like that would make it very hard or impossible.
That must already be gone. Surely people have registered exchange in different languages.
Sorry, what would make it impossible to do that?
The fact that like people are, I mean, you basically can register the same name in every different language as a separate domain.
But isn't that the way to do it? Like if you run a
That's
company,
the way that you talk about it. Absolutely.
Is this not an argument for script-specific TLDs?
I'm not
sure it's necessarily a good idea.
I don't think so. I think from what I'm hearing, I think the fact that we hashed a name before we use it was actually a very good decision because then it means that you can use it in any script current or in the future that is going to be invented.
sorry, like why does hashing make that easier?
Because then you normalize it and then
The base system.
But you could normalize it without hashing it and you get the same result.
yeah, but then my point is that anything can be hashed at some point, right?
But the input is always like for any hash you could use the input in its place to the same end.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, and because I'm expect the ENS domain name is not just a word, but it's soon to be expanded into ontology or semantic web type, that kind of thing. Soon, so in order to preserve Japanese character written in Japanese languages for myself and some other nations that have same kind of requirement, we should think about those kind of minor, I would say minor language or nations requirement into the base design, I believe. So, and I myself feel that we are left behind in the legacy web phase, including current DNS system. So.
I think it's probably a very valid concern that the fact that we've locked up characters 7 names or less means that we've locked out most pictographic languages from having any useful name registered at the moment.
Oh yeah, I think the 7 character limitation is just experimental.
It exists today. So like I say, I can register exchange in my language, you can't do it in yours.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily, and I understand it's always arbitrary, like say in pictographic language, like you say, it's 2 characters big.
Yeah.
And most like you say, 7 characters is a pretty big limitation to you. If we put ENS out there saying, well, you can't register anything less than 64 characters, everyone would be, well, yeah, exactly, we're mad, right? Why would you do that? So it is, I think, yeah.
I mean, it does, yeah, it really makes sense. Like there are languages that literally you cannot register anything except for like a story of your life.
Is there anything like new to be said on the subject? Because I think it might be worth us moving on
maybe,
to other client
I
things.
think I can distill it. So like we've got 2 action possibilities. One is, yeah, we write a big table and then you like rate things, which is a lot of work and labor intensive. The other is maybe just accelerating the rate at which we reduce the character limit,
Yeah.
or I mean, because that is going to happen. So,
Is
so
there
there's a
a
natural
reason,
solution.
is there a reason for it to still be in place today?
Yes.
Yes.
The set of, if you were to plot the value, the sort of cumulative value, however you define that of all names, a large proportion of that would be in short names. And we're concerned about making those available where they will almost certainly not be snapped up by people who are going to use them for their own purpose. Because the system is still much smaller now than we anticipate it being in the future. Basically, when they go up
Is
for
that always the
auction,
case?
yes, but there are different scales of like, you know, if you said most humans are not born yet, that's true now probably, and was also true when there were only 10,000 humans, but it's a lot more true then, you see what I mean?
Exponentially.
Yeah, so basically we want to start releasing those names when we think there's a reasonable probability that the person who actually wants that name, or would most use that name, is watching.
Oh, and honestly, to answer more, I think once we have the program registered in place, I'm okay with releasing it. Like the next registered in place.
And the other consideration is that it's a dispute process. Like if we had a dispute process that would transfer names, like a first layer dispute process, then it would be a lot easier to release these names and the knowledge that if they were egregiously abused, then there would be some way to fix that. But for now, at least, you buy it, it's yours, and there's no changing that. It makes it easier for those names to be locked up. I mean, we're trying to learn from experiences like NamePoint, where people just bought up all the short names and spotted on them. And the problem is that at some point that strangles the host. You end up with so much of the useful namespace tied up that by inactive users that it's not useful.
Which is fair. There's an argument that Nike aren't on Ethereum because Nike Belief isn't available.
Kind of.
I'm curious as to how you're going to get your indicators to say now's the right time to do it.
I'll know it when I see it. When there really are multiple strong or reliable signals of mainstream adoption.
Or even having a dispute process, and then you can just release everything as long as the rightful owners can claim them.
When we've got more than 5 or 6 non-trivial banks who let you actually hold crypto in your bank accounts, things like that, you're actually seeing they're not just.
I also don't really look forward to releasing the names in terms of it's just a buff of support and people being mad and angry and I'm so traumatized from the last job, so maybe we'll be a little bit just recover.
Wait till you guys sell my Ether wallet and cash out your physical honest.
And then release them all, we'll just dump it on my first time.
I mean, this is
turn off the internet.
This is somewhat off topic for the nominal topic of the discussion. But it isn't but it isn't something we've covered in any other session, so I think it is worth spending a little time exploring it. And I completely lost my train of thought.
So we've been talking about this, these different layers of advisories or opinions on what a domain is good or not. And we've been talking about plugging that into some kind of warning system. So I'd be really interested to hear from MetaMask and Mu what their current decision tree looks like in terms of that warning system and what the user experience looks like. And if there's, maybe it could be a discussion for any IP, but maybe there's a way we can kind of formalize that a little bit more. So we're all kind of doing the same thing.
We talked about it a little bit before. We have, the small community right now of people not connected to us that are helping out a lot, and a lot of it's just people that got pitched that are now on getting those people. So we have kind of a community consensus, and then after that, we go and look at it, and you're okay, this is either going to happen or it's not. And we don't have control over some of it because it's not ours, but then they're using the same.
I guess what I meant was what do we display to the user? So for example, one of the problems I see is
the URL blacklist.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different lists. So we have the URL blacklist, which is the in the use Chrome extensions. If you go to a URL that's on the blacklist, it'll show a screen to you that says, hey, this has been reported as a phishing URL or a scam URL, and you probably shouldn't visit it. If you want to visit it, like, don't use this Chrome extension. They have to make a conscious decision to basically like disable the Chrome extension, use a different browser, whatever, in order to access the site. In terms of what URLs get added to that blacklist, it's pretty like we haven't had anything that's super contentious.
Yeah.
Simply because most of them are really obvious. Like it's like 99% of my user wallet variations. Oh my go, like ohmys-go.com. It's not like something that is really, we know what the real ohmys domain is because it's been published everywhere and they're verified on Twitter and all this stuff, and like that's obviously not. So that's like, those are the types of things that we're dealing with right now, and it's really, really obvious. So I'd say the decision making tree is like, you look at it and like if it's not the legit site, like you blacklist it.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So I guess a couple of questions I have, like just to expand on what this might look like.
Yeah.
Say for example, what Jim brought up, space in ASCII and space in Cyrillic. If we go to the user, say, hey, you can go to space.
Yeah.
Like they see space in the URL bar or something like that, and then it's like, hey, actually go to space. Like
Right.
you can do it if you want, but this space is better than that space. Is a little confusing. That's one question. The other question would be like same with the thing with like invisible characters or something like so a lot of the things in some of those recommendations, they're not necessarily like you can send it to a function and get a Boolean response. Some of those like have different things like invisible characters. Like I mean, do we want to say this website you can still go to it, but
We do, they don't.
No, we don't. Wait,
No.
stop. No, with ENS things that have invisible characters, you want to let the user.
No, I'm saying that our approach till this point with what we've been dealing with has been to warn people not to stop them from going there.
right.
Like,
So, and again, we're talking about different things here because we're talking about the Chrome extensions and URLs, we're talking about addresses and what they can do. So I would say that ENS is like kind of both. So in that case, I would say that the language we would use would be to inform the user objectively about what is happening. So meaning that, hey, there's an invisible character here. Like, did you copy and paste this from, a trusted source? Are you sure you want to do that?
Wait.
Those types of things. Yeah.
I disagree there. Shouldn't invisible characters be just taken out away when you normalize the name?
So
I mean,
just our
okay.
knowledge, UTS 46 does remove all invisible characters.
I have no idea. I'm just using this as an example. Like, let's also say the same thing for like a Cyrillic E, or a E with a little thingy, or a thingy, or whatever. Those types of things. How do we handle that? I would say again, like, hey, you have a mixed set of characters. Like half of yours are Latin, and then you have this one rare E.
Right. I think there's a case where it's not mixed, right? So.
Right, and like this is the thing, is like, so one, like my user wallet has 2 E's, which is like the worst thing in the world because there's like 80 E's you can choose from, and they all have really tiny little dots and stuff. And then the L is tall, so the dots get lost into the L. They get people all the time with these guys.
capitalized.
And like they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that too. They don't.
That's kind of solved with like lowercase. Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, so then, yeah, it's so much in my head. We use like monospace fonts for addresses and ENS names. I think Chrome like should definitely differentiate between I's and L's and O's and O's and zeros. Slack, Twitter, and Google fail really hard at this. Like, screw you guys, you're dumb. It's not hard to have a font that's like a cool font that so differentiates between letters. Reddit does this. Like, Reddit's the only site that literally that uses a font that literally you can tell the difference.
This uses a font that's different.
Yeah, and so we purposely use monospace fonts for that reason, for things like this. Anyways, but
again, that comes back to the positive side of things, where we can have someone who registers based on ETH or whatever, and
yeah,
we don't have to spend, we will spend time guessing if it looks dodgy in all the various ways. We can always say, these are the verified guys, these are the people who you probably want to go to, right?
yeah,
And that's that second system that sits on the side of the
Right.
chain, right? And it gives you that additional information. Because that's not something we can ever do fully programmatically.
Yes.
Right.
You know, we don't know if Microsoft Belief is owned by Microsoft or not, we just don't.
Yes.
Right.
So it's
Exactly.
finding how we have a system to do that, and that was like that secondary thing I was talking about, whatever we come up with. So that's where,
Absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
drag you guys in to make sure we're talking about that and seeing what
Yeah.
we are least unhappy with.
Yep, so I completely agree with that. That spoof checker class that implements those two recommendations, basic and this sort of information from the sort of level 2 thing would work exactly like that.
Yes.
So you would basically go, okay, this space thing, does that match anything that's in this? And then we can basically, that's a Boolean response, and you're true, and you go, hey, watch out.
So we can go, and we can, like I say, that gets us to the stage of, we know you typed in space correctly without Cyrillics or invisible characters, or, you know, all the billions things you can do. But are these the people you want to be sending your money to? Is that the second question? That's the other one we need to tackle as well. So yeah, there's the two.
Yeah, so I would say that.
Related but different systems.
I'll give my
Yeah.
first directed at both partners. So you're asking about ETH resolution. I think there's a variety of warnings and things we're going to have to address. I'm very open to having like ongoing UX conversations. Right now, when we resolve ENS names, we have like 3 different resolution type symbols. Right now, they're all very simple though, because we haven't had access to Jim's wonderful Mondo, and we don't have any reputation systems in place yet, right? In terms of common symbols we want to use, we should work on those together because these don't exist for common with URL bars today. We've got lot bars, but you know your browser doesn't like. Or as far as I know, I guess you know some browsers will like say this looks like a suspicious site or whatever, but they don't have these degrees of like certainty or like suspicion or you know advice that we kind of have the power to do. So right now we've got green checks for it is an ENS name. We've got a yellow mark for it like failed to resolve, or no, we got a red mark for it failed to resolve, or maybe that's an error and then yellow for failed to resolve. Anyways, we probably need to explore the like pictographic space for like a variety of warnings, trust levels, confidence, reputation. This is kind of uncharted territory, but I agree that like warning. So if we don't find, you know, if we don't know anything about them, but there's no pictographic things, we probably just make it look kind of normal, not a warning, right? But if we can catch a homoglyph suspicious attack, you know, have something that looks, you know, alerty but not like.
Well,
not probably yellow, not red. I don't know. Like
I personally think that there's a point at which you do just not let that address work. Like there's a point at which like there's $1 million of people's funds that have gone into stress. We know that address is sealed.
Well, so that's,
We
I
should
mean,
shut it down.
but see, these are 2 completely different things. The first thing is saying in all use cases, always, no matter what manual thing happens, if this character exists, we're going to do this. So if we have a Cyrillic E and a set of Latin characters, we're going to throw this warning, right? And then we have this dude took $1 million, like we're going to just blacklist it. It's not, you know, it's going to be a big red warning that says, hey, this guy is stealing people's money. You know, it's like those are 2 separate things, but we still like we can't only do the latter without doing the former because the former applies to everything ever, and it'll prevent the latter from happening.
But the warnings are almost more useful than the actual blacklisting. Like as people actually think about it, and you actually start to like train users to get into this state of like, I want to make sure this is the correct place.
Right.
And there's a continuum. It's not a binary thing between warning and blocking. Like if you look at how Chrome handles things, you know, big red warning, and then you have to click the like advanced button and then the yes, I really know what I'm doing button.
Which like notice that, but that is such good UX. Like that is the really good UX. So you're forced to click a very tiny link where the thing that you want to click the button is to go back, right? You click that. It's not a button. It's like a link inside a paragraph of text. So it literally makes you go through like 2 like pause like twice in order to do it. And like that's smart. Like, and I need to be better. Like, community needs to be better at like these forced pauses, like for confirmation modes, for example, because people like just breeze through them and then they want a confirmation, further confirmation, and I'm like, okay. So those are the types of things that like when we're thinking about UX, we're thinking about what action we want the user to take, or allowing advanced users to do something. Forcing the user to stop, like forcing them to like do that extra work is a really, really good method for that.
So, I mean, as I understand this, this is from long and different UX experience because people are very goal oriented. And when they have a thing they want to do, like visit the site, it takes a hell of a lot to knock them out of that. Click whatever buttons I need to do to get this thing out of the way. So I can get
Especially
that.
the ICOs, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we really need some UX designers who can
Oh, yeah.
leverage similar experience for us.
We need like just more UX designers in this space.
We were actually yesterday talking about the maybe building a UX team for Ethereum. Like the community gets for everybody.
It's a great idea, actually. The intersection of UX and mechanism design is like fascinating, right? Because like people often make kind of dumb decisions when they make intuitive decisions. And like maybe a UX can make the dumb decision the one that's rational for that incentive mechanism.
And people accept defaults as
Well,
well.
this is how the
Default
this is how the Chrome page tries to do it, of course, as Taylor pointed out. The big red button that you might click naively is the one that goes bad.
Well, it cancels your
Yeah. When you look at, I mean, the UX is fascinating, but like buttons and the things that people just do naturally, like I'm sure that you've all had this, like an error message or a confirmation or something where you like consistently click the wrong button, like you consistently click the cancel button. Like sometimes that's bad UX, but sometimes that's actually good UX. So like in a case that that the confirmation would be doing something like sending all your money or something dangerous like deleting your account. Like so on GitHub when you like delete an account or delete a repo, it literally like one of the buttons are flipped, so your default action is to click this one is actually to like just cancel, and then they make you like also manually type in the repo name, which is hidden in the middle of a freaking paragraph again. Like this is like such a UX thing. You hide the information that the user needs inside the paragraph, and you make them like they can't skim it anymore. And
It's like a
yeah.
design of that stool thing you're showing us.
What, sorry?
When you're showing that that perfectly designed chair, it was
Yes.
just like the turn of everything.
The Camden bench,
That's
which
it,
is designed by the London Borough of Camden, and it's been called the perfect anti-object because it is anti-graffiti, anti-drug dealing, anti-slipping,
Oh god.
anti-bag stealing. It is a bench that is designed to find more by what it's not and what it is.
It's
designed
one
for
just
one place.
tilted in different directions.
It alternates the directions. So
Yeah. Why is it that circular?
Because it's
Back and you can't hide. Or?
yeah, it has like no opportunities to hide what you're doing or to like secrete things, I think.
Okay.
Stat rolls off.
Yeah. So some people think this is a bad thing, that it's like it's an object that's defined by all the things it isn't, but other people go, well, lighting things is part of design, so.
I love it. If you want people to click something, put a big green button that says go.
Yeah.
Literally, and I forgot what website it is, there's literally a button on it, and it literally, only thing it does is it counts. It's like, it's a huge number. Like, literally, all it does is count, and like, a lot of people have gone to this website and clicked on that
So
button.
every time anyone clicks anything, it's for everyone.
That was not the Reddit. Was not the Reddit. Like 3
Yeah.
Yeah, there was that too, which was everyone gets to click only once. Yeah. I feel like part of the reason people are so robust at making their way through UIs without paying attention to them is because they're so used to bad UI design. They've developed instincts for bypassing them, which don't serve them well when the
Which is an anti-pattern, right? It's just for the Mist forces you to type your password every time you make a transaction. That might be a good idea because you force you to think, but it also forces you to type like your password automatically all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's terrible because sometimes I've had it happen to me. I was like doing a bunch of things in ENS, buying a bunch of options, typing my password all the time. Suddenly some other field completely unrelated appeared and I typed my password.
You had a support ticket from someone who registered their private key.
That's
Oh,
a
yeah.
common
Do you
thing.
wanna know?
That's not one support ticket, that's several.
Okay, so we actually now, like, if you type your private key into the ENS field, like, it literally, the first thing it does is it, like, checks if it's a valid private, like, okay, so in the ENS field, which is not a private key field, it checks if it's a valid private key. And, like, if it's a valid private key, it literally says, like, stop everything. And it, like, shows you a warning, and it says, hey, it says, this looks like a private key, are you sure you're, like, you want to do this? And we've gotten so many emails from people that are like, oh my god, I just want to say thanks. Like I don't know what I was thinking. Like I was just on autopilot. I was like, yeah, you're not the only one that's looking down and freaking like recording. Like this is amazing. I don't know if he actually registered his private key though, or if he just like.
There's auctions started for private keys.
No, like.
Like,
I don't.
It's a hash of the thread.
Yeah. So my main thing was I was worried. I was like, well, yeah, you didn't like start an auction. Like it's fine. I was thinking about it. I was like, well, actually, like I think that that's a payout with just like the actual private key as like a parameter of the ENS call to the API. Right? Like when you resolve or when you go to check the status of the name, that's like going to the network, right?
No, only invalidation sends the plain text. Invalidation for being too short. That's the only thing that sends plain text.
Oh, okay. So
let me just pull this to a halt for a moment. We've got about 5 minutes left. Does anyone else have UI issues that they want to bring up before lunch? Or sorry, client considerations?
It's not entirely clear to me whether implementing ENS at the development framework level is valuable. I've just finally got most of the Python libraries validating AIP55 checkzones, but support for ENS names in all of the places where address fields are used, like, it's not clear to me whether or not it's a good idea for Web3
So
to take ENS names, just because I'm not sure it's appropriate at that level, and I'm curious what other people think.
This is just risk aversion because ENS might change or screw up or something.
No, it's that Web3, in my opinion, we should not be encouraging people who need ENS names to find addresses to be using low-level tools.
So let me ask, would you say the same thing about the Unix socket functions?
I am not familiar enough with what you're.
When you open a TCP socket, it accepts DNS name, even though that introduces dependence on an external system with all the same arguments as for ENS.
All right, fair point. So no, and I have not thought deep into this either. So I see that like instantiating an instance of a contract, that now makes a lot of sense to use an ENS name because I want to instantiate the right.
Yeah, I think it's just an abstraction question. Like Web3 is actually a convenience library. The provider doesn't need ENS.
Right.
It just enables the actual interface to.
And I'll say that our first, we're changing over the address fields. Our first ones were like on the send tab, and we're like, yay, we're done. And then it actually turns out like the most important places that you want these are the when you add a custom token, and the contracts have in these places that aren't sending to the address. It's like all those places that you don't actually use it for that, but it's super nice to have. Contracts themselves, so common So I would say
No,
go for it.
that right there convinced me.
Yeah, I'm still not convinced. I mean, for one thing, if we think we're gonna stop most of the abuse with extra protocol stuff, that stuff are we gonna put that in Web3 also?
Well, so that extra protocol stuff can be my vision.
Web3.
So
no, actually, also on the chain. So you can write an ENS registry that is a proxy to the main one.
Of course.
That just blacklists anything.
Of course, and you can do one that rewrites too.
And
the question is what would you feel about that in Web3?
Well, so I have an answer
Web3
for
wouldn't
that.
have to care about that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So I don't think that's necessarily cool
No,
because
this is
then you're exposing.
Well, that's why we wanted
So
to.
client design.
abuse things.
So client design.
Yeah.
Right now I'm working on a big refactor to Python Web3, which I understand is very similar to the provider engine for JavaScript Web3, which is, I'm calling it middleware. And almost all of the functionality that is currently inside of my current Python library is moving into middlewares. So the ENS thing is going to end up being a middleware that as you pass requests in, when it sees an ENS name, it does the conversion.
Sure, yeah, but why
And
won't
so-
ENS also be in there instead of Web3?
No, so that's the thing, is that it is an ENS middleware. And the idea is that users will know this is the default set of middlewares that I provide, and they are safe, that they are the same restrictive safe defaults. And the idea there is that people who want their blacklist added in can drop that in as a middleware. People who don't want the blacklist can easily drop it out. The idea is to have an opinionated set of defaults that are hopefully safe and probably more restrictive than necessary. And people who want to do unsafe stuff, who want to bypass things.
And so why is that not something suitable for Web3?
I'm saying that it is now.
Oh.
I have flip-flopped since I began.
I mean, my own opinion would be that system level libraries like Web3 implementations should do the ENS resolution, and the blacklists and whatnot can be implemented by pointing it as a registry that implements that. And that high level things like warning people about phishing sites and so on are naturally UI concerns, so they have to be done at a high level.
Yeah, and I was thinking more of the blacklist.
Yeah. But I think we can and should implement policy contracts that just make blacklisting a matter of changing what the root is rather than having to write new code at the Web3 level.
And then making the default one of those.
That's up to the individual library.
No, that's up to Web3.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
But
Web3 operates like the individual
whether or
library.
not my default ship with through ENS or Blacklisting.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what I would do yet, because I would probably need to wait until those actually exist.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in terms of next steps, do we create an EIP for sort of going through those recommendations and, or is it more outside of that, do you think, in terms of?
I mean, but the
Adding ENS resolution to Web3?
No, sorry, back on the previous topic,
Because
design
really like
considerations.
a document that already exists, right?
I'm still not sure what we're talking about.
You're talking about client implementation.
Yeah, I mean, so like this UX warning stuff,
Yes.
and it's going to be informed by those already existing documents, but those documents don't say how to actually handle them. They basically just,
And I'm not sure it should be in the IP, but
Okay, that's what I was asking.
I should almost make
I
a
would
new
say,
design report.
I would say literally like make a GitHub discussion somewhere and ping me and I'll post it on ours or reference it on ours and
I'm
like,
gonna say the opposite and
You're gonna
say
say
that an opinionated EIP with recommendations for client implementers sounds like a great idea.
let's look, yeah.
As long as it's opinionated recommendations
Yeah.
that try to be objective about what, you know,
Absolutely.
it's like, if we want to be consistent with what's already out there.
well,
here is
yeah, I mean,
a
I would even,
recommendation for,
I would say that the goal of this EIP or whatever would be to, for a new user or a new developer entering the space, or a new wallet or a new client or like a Bitcoin wallet that's like entering the Ethereum space, having a single place they can go and be like, okay, here's the libraries that I need to include and here's the checks I need to run.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, like that's really important. Like I don't know, like whenever I have to go look up the bib mnemonic stuff, like it's like, frick, like I just wish someone would just tell me what to freaking use. You know what I mean?
I'd like
Even
to
if it's-
recall for WalletCon, we should have a WalletCon. Figure this stuff out.
Honestly, I think that would be an excellent idea. I think you should have a wallet foundation
Right.
that
Yeah.
issues technical reports.
Just, yeah,
Oh
right.
my god.
No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. We really do have work problems.
Right, it is however now lunchtime, so all enjoy your lunch, we will reconvene at 1 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah. Just make it and then.
Those listening along at home, we will be starting a new stream at 1 p.m. BST in an hour. Thank you.